Millionaire CEO entered the wrong hospital ward and met a woman in labor with no visitor. Married her after she delivered twins boys. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The hospital corridor stretched endlessly before him. And Julian Hale, worth $2.3 billion, pushed open what he thought was his dying grandmother's door. But instead of a peaceful hospice room, he found chaos. A woman lay in the bed, dark hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, her face twisted in agony. She was gripping the bed rails so hard her knuckles had turned white, and she was completely, devastatingly alone. Julian froze in the doorway. Wrong room. This was clearly the wrong room. He started backing away. "I am sorry. I am looking for someone else. I will just—" But before he could finish, her voice cut through the sterile air like a knife. "Please." It was barely a whisper. Desperate, raw. The kind of sound that stops you in your tracks no matter who you are or where you need to be. "Please do not leave me. I cannot do this alone." Her hand reached toward him, trembling, and something in Julian's chest cracked wide open. His grandmother was dying 3 floors above him. He had driven 90 miles an hour through New York traffic to say goodbye to the woman who raised him. Every second he stood here was a second he was losing with her. But this woman, this stranger, she had no one. "Where is your family?" Julian heard himself ask, even as his feet carried him closer to her bedside. "The father? Anyone?" A contraction seized her body before she could answer. The sound that tore from her throat was unlike anything Julian had ever heard. Primal, terrifying, the sound of someone fighting a battle completely alone. Without thinking, he took her hand. She gripped it like he was the only thing keeping her tethered to earth. When the contraction passed, she gasped out her answer. "There is no one. He left when I told him. My family disowned me when I would not." She could not finish. Another wave of pain crashed over her. "Please, I know you do not know me. I know this is insane, but please do not leave me alone." Julian Hale had built his fortune by knowing when to walk away. He had spent 3 decades learning to protect himself from situations that offered no clear return. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to find a nurse, explain the mistake, and run to his grandmother's room before it was too late. Instead, he pulled a chair to her bedside and sat down. "I am Julian, and I am not going anywhere." Have you ever walked through the wrong door only to realize later it was exactly where you needed to be? Have you ever made a choice in a single moment that rewrote the entire story of your life? What Julian did not know as he held that stranger's hand was that his grandmother would take her last breath while he sat in that room. He did not know that the choice he made in that doorway would cost him the chance to say goodbye to the woman who raised him. But he also did not know that it would give him everything he never knew he was missing. This is a story about wrong turns and right choices, about loss and love and the terrifying courage it takes to stay when everything tells you to run. And it begins with a man who had everything except the one thing that actually mattered. Before I take you deeper into this story, I need you to do something for me. If you believe that sometimes the universe puts us exactly where we need to be, even when it feels like everything is falling apart, hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell right now. This story is going to challenge everything you think you know about love, fate, and second chances. Trust me, you are going to want to see how this ends. Now let me tell you about the man Julian Hale was before he walked through that door. At 34 years old, Julian had accomplished what most people only dream about. He had taken Hale Industries, a failing family business that was hemorrhaging money when he inherited it at 22, and transformed it into a technology empire worth $2.3 billion. He had been on the cover of Forbes twice. He had a penthouse in Manhattan that overlooked Central Park. He had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. And he was completely, utterly alone. His parents had died in a car accident when he was 7 years old. A rainy night on the interstate. A truck driver who fell asleep at the wheel. One phone call that erased everything he knew about family and safety and the idea that tomorrow was guaranteed. His grandmother Evelyn had raised him after that. She had taken a traumatized, silent little boy and poured so much love into him that he eventually learned to speak again, to trust again, to believe that the world might not be entirely cruel. She had also taught him chess, business, and the value of keeping promises. But somewhere along the way, Julian had forgotten her most important lesson. Success means nothing if you have no one to share it with. He had been so focused on building his empire that he had stopped visiting, stopped calling, stopped being present for the woman who had given him everything. And now she was dying. The phone call had come at the worst possible moment. Julian had been in the middle of closing the most important deal of his career. Japanese executives had flown 14 hours specifically for his signature. Billions of dollars hung in the balance. His assistant had knocked on the conference room door with that look on her face. The look that said something was very wrong. "Mr. Hale, it is your grandmother. The hospital says you should come now." Julian had stood up from that conference table and walked out without a single word of explanation. He had left his team to handle the stunned executives. He had left billions of dollars unsigned on the table. Some things were more important than money. He just wished it had not taken him 34 years to remember that. The drive to St. Augustine Medical Center had been a blur of red lights and desperate prayers. Julian could not remember the last time he had prayed for anything, but he prayed that night. "Please let me get there in time. Please let me say goodbye. Please give me one more chance to tell her I am sorry for all the visits I missed, all the calls I did not return, all the times I chose work over her." He had burst through the hospital doors at 11:47 p.m. The elevator had seemed to take forever. The corridors all looked the same. Room 412. That was what the nurse had said. 4th floor, room 412. But exhaustion and grief had clouded his judgment. He had turned left when he should have turned right. He had counted wrong, and he had pushed open the door to room 412 in the maternity ward instead of room 412 in the oncology wing. One wrong turn. One door that changed everything. The woman's name was Mira Castellano. He learned this between contractions, in the brief moments when she could speak without screaming. She was 28 years old. She had been an elementary school teacher for 6 years. She was having twins, and everyone who should have been in this room with her had abandoned her long before tonight. The father was a man named Richard. He left the moment the pregnancy test came back positive. Mira's voice was hoarse, her eyes fixed on the ceiling as another wave of pain began building. He said children were not in his 5-year plan. Like I was a business proposal that no longer aligned with his goals. Julian felt rage building in his chest. What kind of man walks away from his own children? The kind of man who never saw me as a partner. Mira gripped his hand harder as the contraction peaked. The kind of man who wanted the convenience of a relationship without any of the commitment. He was very good at pretty words. I was very good at believing them. "What about your family?" Mira let out a sound that might have been a laugh if it had not been so bitter. "Traditional Italian Catholics. Very traditional. My father told me I had 2 choices. Get rid of the pregnancy or get out of his house. I chose my children. They chose their principles." She paused, catching her breath. "My mother has not spoken to me in 7 months. My sister sends me Bible verses about redemption sometimes. My brother. I do not actually know where my brother stands because he refuses to get involved. I think he is afraid of making my father angry." The picture forming in Julian's mind was devastating. A woman who had done nothing wrong except fall in love with the wrong person and refused to abandon her children for it. Punished by everyone who should have protected her. "What about your job?" "Surely the school." Mira's jaw tightened. "My principal suggested I take a leave of absence. He said it would be better for everyone if the children did not see me in my condition. Better for everyone. That was how he put it. Like I was a problem to be managed rather than a teacher who had given 6 years to that school. Julian was beginning to understand why she had been so desperate for him to stay. It was not just the fear of giving birth alone. It was the accumulated weight of everyone she had trusted, proving that trust meant nothing. The universe has a sense of humor, though. Mira managed something close to a smile despite the pain. "I could not afford 1 baby. So, it gave me 2. Boys. Twin boys." A nurse came in to check Mira's progress. She looked at Julian with curiosity. "Are you the father?" Julian opened his mouth to explain. To say he was just a stranger who had wandered into the wrong room. To clarify that he had no connection to this woman or her children. But Mira's hand tightened on his. He could feel her fear that he would use this moment to escape. That he would finally remember he had somewhere else to be. "I am staying," Julian said instead. "That is all that matters." The nurse gave him a small smile and went about her work. After she left, Mira looked at Julian with tears in her eyes. "You do not have to do this. Whoever you were looking for when you walked in here, they probably need you more than I do." Julian thought about his grandmother 3 floors above. He thought about how she was slipping away from consciousness with each passing hour. He thought about the goodbye he was missing, the final words he would never get to say. The guilt was suffocating. But something kept him rooted to this chair. Something he did not understand and could not explain. "There is nowhere else I need to be," he lied. And then, more honestly than he had been in years, "Let me stay, please." The please surprised even him. Julian Hale did not say please. He demanded, he negotiated, he commanded. But something about Mira Castellano stripped away every piece of armor he had spent decades constructing. They settled into a rhythm as the hours stretched on. Contraction, recovery, conversation. Contraction, recovery, conversation. Mira told him about her students, the third graders who made her laugh every single day. The way they wrote her notes that said things like, "You are the best teacher in the whole world," spelling errors and all. How one little boy had given her a drawing of a family and whispered, "You can have mine since yours is being mean." Julian told her about his grandmother, the way she always smelled like lavender and vanilla, how she had taught him to play chess when he was 8 and had never once let him win, the advice she gave him when he took over the family business. She said, "Build something that matters." Julian's voice cracked slightly. I thought I understood what she meant. I thought she was talking about the company, but I think she meant something else entirely. What do you think she meant? I think she meant that buildings crumble, companies fail, money disappears, but the people you love and the love you give them, that is what matters. That is what lasts. Mira studied his face through eyes hazy with exhaustion and pain. "You sound like someone who learned that lesson the hard way." "I sound like someone who is learning it right now." The clock on the wall showed 2:34 a.m. Julian's phone had been buzzing in his pocket for hours. The hospital staff trying to reach him about his grandmother, his assistant with updates from the abandoned deal, the world demanding his attention. He ignored every single notification. Around hour 16, something shifted. Mira's energy began to flag. The fierce determination that had carried her through the night started crumbling. "I do not know if I can do this." Her voice was barely audible. "I have been doing this alone for 7 months, being pregnant alone, preparing for children alone, going to doctor appointments alone, and now this. I do not know if I have anything left." Julian leaned closer, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Listen to me. You have already done the impossible. You chose your children when everyone told you not to. You walked away from everything you knew to protect them. You have been fighting alone for 7 months, and you never stopped. Not once." Tears streamed down Mira's face. "This right here, this is just the last step. And you are not taking it alone anymore. In just a few moments, everything is going to change. 2 babies will be born. A grandmother will take her last breath. And Julian will face the consequences of his impossible choice. But before we get there, I want to hear from you. Have you ever made a decision that everyone else thought was crazy, but something in your soul told you it was right? Drop a comment below and tell me about it. And if you are feeling this story, if Julian and Mira's journey is hitting you in the heart the way it hit me when I first heard it, smash that like button. Your engagement helps this story reach others who need to hear it. Now, let me tell you about the moment Leo and Noah entered the world. End of part 1. Please confirm you approve this first part, and I will proceed with part 2, which will cover the birth of the twins, the grandmother's death, the unconventional proposal, the year of proving, the breakthrough confession, and the beautiful resolution 5 years later. At 3:47 in the morning, after 19 hours of labor, the first baby was born. The sound that filled the room was not Mira's screaming anymore. It was something else entirely. A tiny, furious cry from a human being who had just been rudely evicted from the only home he had ever known. The doctor placed the infant on Mira's chest, and Julian watched something miraculous happen. Every trace of exhaustion melted from her face. Every ounce of pain seemed to evaporate. What replaced it was an expression Julian had never seen before. Pure, transcendent, overwhelming love. Leo. Mira whispered the name like a prayer. His name is Leo. The baby's cries softened against his mother's skin. His tiny fingers curled and uncurled. His eyes, though barely open, seemed to be searching for something. Julian could not breathe. He had closed billion-dollar deals without flinching. He had fired executives and acquired companies and negotiated with governments. But watching this woman hold her son for the first time brought him to his knees. 17 minutes later, Noah arrived. He was smaller than his brother, quieter too. While Leo had announced his presence with indignant screaming, Noah entered the world with a soft cry and eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at Julian. Like a newborn should not be capable of that kind of awareness, like he was already evaluating this stranger and deciding whether to trust him. Noah. Mira's voice was thick with tears. Leo and Noah. She looked up at Julian then. This woman who had been a stranger 6 hours ago. This woman whose hand he had held through the longest night of both their lives. Thank you. The words seemed inadequate for what she was trying to express. For staying. For being here. I do not know how I will ever. Do not. Julian interrupted gently. You do not owe me anything. I was just. You were everything. Mira corrected him. Tonight, you were everything. Julian did not know what to say to that. So he said nothing. He just looked at these two tiny humans who had entered the world with nothing except a mother who loved them and a stranger who had wandered through the wrong door. And somewhere in that moment, without understanding it or being able to explain it, Julian Hale fell in love with two children who were not his. The charge nurse found him at 6:23 in the morning. Julian had stepped out of Mira's room to get coffee. He was exhausted in a way he had never experienced before. The kind of exhaustion that goes beyond physical tiredness into something deeper. Mr. Hale? He turned to see a woman in scrubs approaching him with that expression. The expression that medical professionals wear when they have to deliver news that will shatter someone's world. I am so sorry. We have been trying to reach you for hours. Your grandmother, she passed at 6:15 this morning. It was peaceful. She went in her sleep. The coffee cup slipped from Julian's fingers. He barely registered the hot liquid splashing against his expensive shoes. He barely registered the nurse's hand on his arm, steadying him. All he could think was that his grandmother had died alone. While he was 3 floors down holding a stranger's hand, the woman who raised him had taken her last breath with no one beside her. He had missed saying goodbye. He had chosen someone else's beginning over his grandmother's ending. The guilt hit him like a physical blow. His knees buckled. The nurse helped him to a chair and said things that were probably comforting, but Julian could not hear any of them. All he could hear was his grandmother's voice from years ago. Success means nothing if you have no one to share it with. He had failed her. He had failed the one person who had never failed him. Julian did not remember walking to his grandmother's room. But somehow he found himself standing in the doorway, staring at an empty bed. The sheets had already been stripped. Her Bible, the one she kept on her nightstand every day for as long as he could remember, was gone. The room smelled like antiseptic and absence. There was nothing left of Evelyn Hale in this room. There was nothing left except the choices Julian had made and the consequences he would have to live with. He stood there for a long time. Minutes, maybe hours. Time had stopped meaning anything. And then, without understanding why, he walked back down to the maternity ward. Mira was awake when he returned. The twins were sleeping in their hospital bassinets. The room was quiet except for the soft sounds of newborn breathing. She took one look at his face and understood immediately. You lost someone. It was not a question. Last night, while you were here with me, Julian could not speak. His throat had closed around words that refused to form. Mira shifted in her bed, wincing slightly from the movement, and made room beside her. Sit. Tell me about her. So he did. For hours he talked about Evelyn Hale, the woman who had taken in a traumatized 7-year-old and taught him how to live again. The chess games that lasted entire afternoons. The business lessons disguised as bedtime stories. The way she called him every Sunday morning, even when he was too busy to answer. She would have liked you, Julian said finally. She always said I needed someone who would call me on my nonsense. Mira smiled softly. I barely know you. I do not know your nonsense yet, Julian repeated. That word implies you intend to find out. The word hung between them, heavy with possibility that neither of them was ready to name. The weeks that followed made no logical sense. Julian had a company to run. He had deals to close and executives to manage, and a life in Manhattan that demanded his attention. Instead, he visited Mira every single day. He told himself it was just to check on the twins, just to make sure they were healthy and that Mira was recovering properly, just to tie up loose ends from that strange night when fate had thrown them together. But the visits kept getting longer. He helped Mira navigate the terrifying logistics of being discharged from the hospital with 2 newborns and no support system. He drove her back to her studio apartment and saw for the first time how she had been living. One room, a mattress on the floor, baby supplies stacked in corners because there was no nursery, a refrigerator with more condiments than actual food. "This is temporary," Mira said quickly, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "I had savings, but the hospital bills and the baby supplies and—" Julian held up his hand. "I am not judging. I am just—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I am just thinking about what you need. What I need is to figure this out myself." Mira's chin lifted with familiar stubbornness. "I have been figuring things out myself for 7 months. I can keep doing it." But 3 days later, Julian showed up with a night nurse. Mira's reaction was immediate and furious. "No, absolutely not. I do not accept charity. I do not need you to rescue me. I am not some damsel who—" "This is not about you," Julian interrupted calmly. "This is about Leo and Noah. They need their mother to be healthy and rested. You cannot take care of twins without sleep. You cannot afford to get sick. This is not charity. This is practicality." Mira's eyes narrowed. "You are manipulating me. Is it working?" She glared at him for a long moment. Then her shoulders sagged. "I hate that you used the babies against me. I know. But is the nurse staying?" The nurse stayed. And so did Julian. He learned things he had never expected to learn. How to change a diaper at 3 in the morning without fully waking up. How to hold a bottle at exactly the right angle. How to tell the difference between Leo's hungry cry and Noah's I need attention cry. He failed constantly, spectacularly, in ways that would have been humiliating if Mira had not been failing right alongside him. But he kept showing up, every day, every night, every feeding and every diaper change and every moment when Mira looked like she might collapse from exhaustion. He was there. 1 month after the twins were born, Julian stood in Mira's cramped kitchen and said the words that would change everything. "Marry me." Mira nearly dropped the bottle she was warming. "Excuse me?" "Hear me out." Julian stepped closer, his voice steady despite the fact that his heart was racing. "You need stability. Financial, practical, emotional. I need purpose. Something real. Something that matters. We have known each other for a month, Julian. I know. You do not love me. Not yet," Julian admitted. "But I could. I think I am already starting to. And even if I am wrong about that, I know I love those boys. I have loved them since the moment I watched them take their first breaths." Mira sank onto the couch that doubled as her bed. Her expression was impossible to read. "This is insane." "Probably," Julian agreed. "But I am not asking you to love me. I am not even asking you to pretend. I am asking you to let me help. Officially, legally, in a way that protects you and the boys, regardless of what happens between us." "And what happens when you get bored?" Mira's voice was sharp. "What happens when the novelty wears off and you remember that you have a billion-dollar company in a penthouse and a life that does not include midnight feedings and screaming infants?" "That life was empty," Julian said quietly. "I had everything and I had nothing. My grandmother dying made me realize that I have spent 34 years building an empire with no one to share it with. You and Leo and Noah, you are not a detour from my real life. You are the real life I have been missing." Mira was quiet for a long time. Julian could see her processing, calculating, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. Finally, she spoke. 1 year. "What?" "1 year of proof." Mira's voice was firm. "If you want to marry me, fine. But the boys do not know about it. They do not get attached to someone who might leave. We are partners, co-parents, whatever you want to call it. But for 1 year, you prove that this is real. That you are not going to wake up one day and decide fatherhood is too hard, or Denver is too boring, or you miss your old life. Done. I am not finished." Mira held up her hand. "If after 1 year you still want this, if after 1 year I still want this, then we make it official in their eyes. Then we become a real family. But until then, you are on probation. And if you fail, you do not get another chance. Ever." Julian understood what she was really saying. She had been abandoned by everyone she trusted. The father of her children, her family, her career. She had learned the hard way that promises meant nothing, and people left when things got difficult. She was not going to let her sons learn that lesson. 1 year, Julian agreed. "I will prove myself every single day for a year. And then you will see, this is not impulse. This is not grief or hero complex or anything else. I want a family. I want purpose. I want you." They were married in a courthouse 3 weeks later. No guests, no fanfare, just legal documents and a judge who had clearly performed these ceremonies thousands of times before. The kiss that sealed it was brief and formal and sent electricity down Julian's spine that he carefully did not examine. We are almost at the end now, and I have to be honest with you. This story changed something in me when I first heard it. It reminded me that the things that break us can also be the things that rebuild us if we let them. If this story moved you, if Julian and Mira's journey made you believe that second chances are real, I need you to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Mr. Dalton's Story House is where we tell stories that matter. Stories about love and loss and the messy, beautiful work of becoming who we are meant to be. Leave a comment telling me what part of this story hit you hardest. Now let me tell you how their story ends. Or should I say, how it truly began. The year that followed was the hardest of Julian's life. He learned that success in business meant absolutely nothing when faced with a colicky infant at 3 a.m. He discovered that all his negotiation skills were useless against a 6-month-old who refused to eat anything except sweet potato puree. He failed, constantly, repeatedly, in ways that humbled him more than 3 decades of corporate achievement ever had. But he also learned the specific weight of a sleeping baby against his chest. The sound of Leo's laugh, explosive and joyful and impossible not to smile at. The way Noah would stare at him during feedings with those evaluating eyes that slowly, gradually began to soften into trust. And Mira. He learned the sound of her voice reading bedtime stories. The way she hummed while cooking, always slightly off-key. The fierce protectiveness that transformed her face whenever anyone questioned her choices. He learned to love her, not in one moment, but in thousands of small ones that accumulated until the feeling was simply undeniable. 10 months into their arrangement, they were sitting on the terrace of the home Julian had moved them into. The twins were asleep. The night was quiet. "When are you going to believe me?" Julian asked. "Believe what? That I am staying, that this is real, that I am not going to disappear." Mira's fingers tightened on her wine glass. "Because people always stay until they do not. Because everyone who was supposed to love me unconditionally found conditions anyway. I am not them. I know." Mira's voice cracked. "I know you are not. But I am scared, Julian. I am scared of believing you, of letting myself feel what I have been fighting for months, of loving you and losing you and having to explain to 2 small boys why the man they call Dada is not coming home anymore." Julian set down his wine and knelt beside her chair. "Then let me make you a new promise. Not that I will never hurt you. I am human and imperfect and still learning. But I promise I will never stop trying. I will never choose easy over meaningful. I will never be the man who walked away." Mira's tears fell freely now. "I love you," she whispered. "I have loved you for months." I did not want to say it because saying it makes it real. And real things can break. Or real things can last, Julian countered. We get to choose which story we believe. I am choosing the one where we are sitting on this terrace 50 years from now, watching our grandchildren play, still grateful for wrong turns and right choices. The kiss that followed was nothing like their courthouse ceremony. This kiss was surrender, promise, the beginning of everything they had both been afraid to hope for. 5 years later, Julian stood in the backyard of their home watching Leo and Noah race across the grass. They were 6 years old now, wild and wonderful and completely, utterly his. Mira sat on the porch swing, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. A daughter, due in 3 months, no regrets. She called out to him. Julian thought about the boardroom he had walked out of, the deal he had never closed, the grandmother whose death he had missed. He thought about wrong doors and desperate prayers and the strangest, most improbable love story he could have ever imagined. Only that it took me 34 years to find you. His sons tackled him to the ground, demanding participation in whatever elaborate game they were playing. His wife laughed with the joy of someone who had finally stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. And Julian Hale, who had once had everything except what mattered, understood at last what his grandmother had tried to teach him. Some mistakes are actually miracles in disguise. He had walked through the wrong door. It had led him exactly where he was meant to be. Here is what I want you to take from Julian and Mira's story. Sometimes the wrong door is actually the right one. Sometimes the detour is actually the destination. Sometimes we have to lose the plan to find the purpose. If you are standing at your own wrong door right now, wondering whether to step through, let this story be your sign. The path you did not plan might be the one that leads you home. Thank you for trusting me with your time today. If someone in your life needs to hear this story, share this video with them. Sometimes the story we need is not our own. It is someone else's, showing us what is possible. Subscribe to Mr. Dalton Storyhouse for more stories that matter. And remember, the wrong door might just be the right one.